Hello, this is Dr. David Drozek, talking to you about lifestyle medicine, the road less traveled. I work right here at Memorial Health System with the Live Memorial Well and in the Lifestyle Medicine Clinic. I also teach at Ohio University, and I have no real conflicts of interest to report. If you want any references, I can send you the PowerPoint slides, which have the references in the notes, or specific articles if you email me at ddrozek@mhsystem.org. When I started down the path of lifestyle medicine, it wasn't well traveled. Occasionally, I might find another traveler on the path to give me some encouragement and some direction. And then as time went by, there were more and more people on this path. Let me start with my story, how I got onto the path in the first place. I hit my early 50s. I was a busy practicing general surgeon. I knew I was overweight and I had some heartburn, but I thought, well, I should go see a primary care doc. And I found out I had prediabetes, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. My doc did what most docs do, pulled out the prescription pad and gave me prescription for Janumet, as well as Crestor, a statin. I took those because I did not want to have diabetes. He said, come back in about 3 months and I'll give you something for the blood pressure as well. He said nothing about diet or physical activity. So I started taking the medications, and like many people who take metformin, I developed diarrhea. Crestor, like many statins, cause muscle cramps. I was one of the 20% who developed the muscle cramps in the legs. I hadn't started the blood pressure medicine, so didn't know what yet was to expect from side effects there. But then now, as we know, those proton pump inhibitors, which I'd been taking for several years, may be predisposing us for osteoporosis and kidney disease and dementia. Well, as I mentioned, the doctor didn't say anything about diet, but I knew I should probably stop drinking Dr. Pepper and stop eating my daily Snickers bar or two. And I'd heard about this Mediterranean diet, so I thought, well, I'll give that a try. I eliminated the red meats, which we weren't eating that much of anyway, and processed meats, we got rid of those, and I was eating low-fat dairy, some yogurt and skim milk, and some poultry and seafood, and thought, well, I did lose 5 pounds, and when I went back to see the doctor, the cholesterol did improve because statins work, but at the cost of the leg cramps, which were slowing down my exercise. The blood pressure was unchanged, but it hadn't been treated, but the diabetes was progressing. So I thought, well, that's just the way it's going to be. I'll do my best to slow it down. I didn't want to have diabetes, but didn't know what else to do. And then in May 2011, I heard Dr. Esselstyn from Cleveland Clinic speak in Athens. He and Dr. Campbell were on their tour promoting Forks Over Knives, and he put up this angiogram film on the slides showing a clogged artery that became clean after just a few years of a plant-based diet. And he said, by the way, people lost weight, their blood pressure normalized, their diabetes went away, they got off all their medicines, they got well, and their cholesterol came down. They didn't need statins to make this change in their arteries. I was a bit skeptical, but I was ready for change. I had already gone through those stages of change. I didn't want to have diabetes. So I spent some time reading and studying, which I'm going to share some of that information with you. And I decided to dive into that plant-based whole food diet. I lost, well, actually, I'm down about 35 pounds at this point. My heartburn's gone. My blood pressure is normal without medication. My cholesterol runs 140 to 160, down from about 240 without medication. And my last hemoglobin A1C, after getting up to about 6.4, is now in the mid-4s without medication. We've been very well trained how to manage chronic disease, but we aren't well trained on how to reverse it. So I want to introduce you to a new paradigm that we use in lifestyle medicine. If you can imagine a sink that is clogged with the water running and the water spilling over onto the floor, we spend most of our time in medicine mopping up the floor using our pills and procedures to take care of the spilled water. What lifestyle medicine focuses on is going back to the tap, unclogging the drain, turning off the water, dealing with the underlying cause of these diseases so we never need to get to the point of surgery or all those medications. The modalities we use in lifestyle medicine are a plant-based whole food diet, physical activity, stress management, control of unhealthy substances, healthy sleep, and meaningful relationships. Those are the tools. This year, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine as a specialty now is 15 years old. We've been offering a board examination for the last few years. We're on track to be recognized by the American Board of Medical Examiners. That's a 10-year process. And the AMA back in 2012 recognized lifestyle medicine as the first and primary mode of preventing and, when appropriate, treating chronic disease. And I would suggest that it's appropriate much more often than we utilize it. This also fits in beautifully with those of the philosophy of osteopathic medicine for those of us who are DOs. The body is a unit and it is capable of self-healing if we give it the right environment. And I would argue that this is indeed rational treatment. So why don't we do it? Well, there's all kinds of barriers to practicing lifestyle medicine. One is we didn't know about it, and many of you don't know about it. So that's part of my job, is to inform you. That's why we're doing this today. Lack of time, it does take time, and we don't get paid very well for doing it. We're working on changing that. And it's contrary to our current system, which is so oriented toward pills and procedures. Actually, if we get people well, some of us won't have as much work to do. So it's contrary to what we have as a healthcare system and would actually impact our bottom line unless we change that around. And patients want a quick fix. Many patients have been taught, just take the pill. Don't worry about the lifestyle change. Well, we're going to concentrate today on the knowledge aspect of it, so I can give you that knowledge that will arm you, and hopefully you'll think about lifestyle medicine as an option for your patients and send them our way so that we can help take care of them, because we know your time is limited. Well, these chronic lifestyle-related diseases, we all know them. Actually, about 3/4 of our population have them if we consider overweight in that. And actually, right here at Memorial Health System, we've got about 3/4 of our employees with diabetes or pre-diabetes. That's not even taking into account the weight. It's 7 of the 10 leading causes of death and accounts for about 90% of our healthcare spending. We're talking cardiovascular disease, diabetes, the risk factors for those, obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, many of our other diseases like GERD and autoimmune diseases. The list is long and goes on and on. We want to look at how we can actually reverse these rather than just managing them using those tools that we talked about. So we're going to focus predominantly on the plant-based whole food diet, since that is the most potent tool that we have. And we've known this for quite a while, but we seem to have forgotten it as the pharmaceutical and procedure industries really took hold. So let's take a short stroll through history to remind you what we already know but may have forgotten. Well, way back, Hippocrates said, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." But we want to come up a little bit more contemporary. And back in the 1900s, Thomas Edison said, "The doctor of the future will give no medication, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." We had our first evidence of this even before Edison died. Back in 1927, Dr. Sweeney took a group of medical students in Texas. They were all males, they were all healthy, and he broke them into 4 groups. He assigned them a specific diet for 2 days, just 48 hours. A quarter of them ate a high carbohydrate diet. And look at the list there, most of that's kind of junky carbohydrates. Another quarter% got protein from animal sources, lean meat and egg whites. Another quarter got a high fat diet, things that would make us shudder today to think about. And the other fourth had just a water diet. They fasted, no food. After 48 hours, they were given a glucose tolerance test. Now, interestingly, those that were on that high carbohydrate diet had a normal glucose tolerance test, while those who ate the high protein diet and the high fat diet and those who were in ketosis from the starvation actually all had abnormal glucose tolerance tests. Glucose intolerance in 2 days with a high animal protein diet, and especially with a high fat diet, but not with high carbohydrates. So what does that tell us about what we eat today? What did you have for breakfast? What would that be doing to your glucose tolerance? Why is it that we are so focused on these carbohydrates? Well, Hemsworth, then a few years later, put a bunch of healthy volunteers on a high-fat diet for a couple of weeks, and the other group on a high carbohydrate diet, and he found that the high fat diet again caused abnormal glucose tolerance tests, while the high carbohydrate diet did not. From this, and in the context of other studies, Hemsworth said this is irrefutable proof that a liberal allowance of carbohydrate acts favorably on the diabetic's health. Rabinowitz in Montreal then took a bunch of his diabetic patients that he had been following for 5 years or more and had good records on their insulin requirements and their blood sugars. He changed his patients from a low carb to a high carbohydrate, low calorie diet, and he rapidly reduced their insulin requirements and improved their lipid levels. Rabinowitz says it's necessary to modify the prevalent conception of the metabolism of diabetes. Carbohydrates improve, whereas fats impair carbohydrate tolerance. Then in 1939, Walter Kempner opened his Rice Institute, where he put people on a rice diet who had advanced diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And with a rice diet, and that's not an acronym, that's white rice with some vegetables, he reversed diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and even retinopathy. White rice, but that's what we tell diabetics to avoid. Well, the question is, are we trying to manage disease or reverse disease? White rice had been consumed in China and Japan for 150 years with minimal type 2 diabetes and minimal coronary artery disease, and actually average cholesterols in the 120s. Then fast food entered, and now the levels of diabetes are beginning to rival ours. But the white rice was not the causative factor. So let's take a tangent and look at some of these other popular diets that are all promoting this low carbohydrate intake. One of the most popular ones right now is the ketogenic diet, and I would encourage you to go to nutritionfacts.org. Dr. Greger looks at the research and gives you a very nice synopsis in just 3 to 5 minutes. He sends out regular videos. I would encourage you, if this is interest to you, to go ahead and sign up for his videos. But he has a nice series on the ketogenic diet. So the ketogenic diets do have evidence toward short-term improvements. You do get weight loss, your blood sugars do come down, and the lipids improve. There are some possible long-term benefits. possibly with children with intractable epilepsy, and some limited evidence that it might be helpful for Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and glaucoma. However, the ketogenic diets cause inflammation, insulin resistance, and beta cell dysfunction, things that aren't good. And if you follow these out more than several months, there is an increased risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease and cancer and fatty liver disease and chronic kidney disease and osteoporosis and death from all causes. So fortunately, most people don't follow the ketogenic diet very long because it's not a very pleasant diet. But there's all kinds of these other low carbohydrate diets as well, like the Atkins diet and the Whole30 and other things that are being promoted out there. They all increase the risk of diabetes if you follow them long term. They increase the all-cause mortality. However, if you substitute the animal-based protein and fat with a plant-based low-carb diet, the cardiovascular and mortality risk minimizes. So there's something about these animal products, and the American Heart Association says those high animal protein, low carbohydrate diets actually give you some benefit due to starvation, but they're deficient in phytonutrients. They probably accelerate heart disease and they increase the risk of cancer and diabetes, but they're not as harmful if plant protein is substituted. So back from our tangent, moving up to the mid-1970s, Nathan Pritikin, who is kind of an inventor, entrepreneur, was diagnosed with heart disease at an early age. He watched his father and his brother die from the disease, and he did not want to follow that same path. So he spent some time researching things, and he found some of these studies that we've been talking about, and he decided to see about reversing his own heart disease, which then evolved into his center called the Pritikin Longevity Center, which is for the rich and famous because it costs like $30,000 for a couple of weeks to go there. But he clinically reversed their symptoms of heart disease and other lifestyle-related diseases. Dean Ornish, also in the 70s, proved by imaging that you could reverse coronary artery disease with a plant-based diet, stress management, and physical activity. He subsequently has shown that he can also reverse early-stage prostate cancer, and there's some evidence that maybe even advanced prostate cancer responds. There's lengthening of telomeres, and he fought the battle with Congress to get his program reimbursed by Medicare. Then along came Dr. Esselstyn, who with a plant-based diet alone showed angiographic reversal of heart disease as well as hypertension, diabetes, and overweight. To date, the plant-based diet is the only treatment that we know of that actually reverses coronary artery disease. Nothing else we do can reverse it. It slows it down, temporizes it, but the plant-based diet actually reverses it. Now you know, now you need to tell your patients that there is something that will reverse it. Dr. Barnard did a study taking people with diabetes, put a plant-based low-fat diet, which he called a vegan low-fat diet. Now vegan, I don't like that term particularly because it can mean French fries and Oreo cookies, but in his study it was a plant-based low-fat diet. He ran that against the promoted American Diabetes Association low-carb diet, and after 22 weeks his patients had lower hemoglobin A1Cs than those on the ADA diet as well. They had much lower LDL cholesterols. Dr. McDougall runs a 10-day residential program where people come in and he stops their chronic disease medications, their heart disease, their diabetes disease medications, takes them off, and 90% of them are able to go home without their medications in 10 days. following a plant-based diet, physical activity, stress management, and if they stay on what he's taught them, they can stay healthy. Dr. Hans Diehl wanted to develop a program that was less expensive and not residential, something that the average person could participate in. And he developed a CHIP program, which we've run here in Marietta a few years back with some good success. And Athens runs several of these. We've now had 35 or so different programs. We've had over 800 people participate. And we've published several articles on the results of the CHIP program. Half the people that take insulin that go through CHIP can get off of their insulin. Many others can have reductions in the amount. They can get off other medications. The big study was done in 2012 in the American Journal of Cardiology showing the reduction of these cardiovascular risk factors. We published a more limited study here of about 250 patients from Athens and found the same results. And let me show you what can happen. Now, granted, I am cherry picking. I've got a patient here who did really well, but this isn't unique. This is oftentimes what we can get. So here's a patient that came in with a cholesterol of over 351 by the end of the program, down to 167 without medication. The LDL cholesterol was 246, came down to 105. Triglycerides, 280, came down to 84. She was pre-diabetic, reverted to a normal fasting blood sugar, and she lost 9 pounds in the process. We wanted to find out if this was possible to work in people who are living in poverty around us. We got a grant, and we ran a comparative study. People who went through CHIP paid for by a grant because they couldn't afford it, people who paid out of pocket, and people who Ohio University paid for them to take the program. And they all did equally well. So just because somebody is poor doesn't mean they can't get the benefits of the CHIP program if somebody's willing to fund it and provide it for them. So the question is, do we want to settle with just managing disease? Or do we want to reverse these chronic lifestyle diseases like cardiovascular disease and its risk factors and diabetes? Let's take a look at the blue zones. You may be familiar with that. Back in 2012, Dan Buettner was sent by National Geographic to find the places in the world where people live the longest and the healthiest. He found 5 of these, and what he found was they had many things in common, even though genetically they were diverse groups, culturally they were diverse groups, yet they all lived routinely into their mid-90s and hundreds. And they had this concept of compression of morbidity, or what we can call health span. So here's functional capacity, the ability to do the things you want to do in life, and here's age. And as we get older, here in the States, we get 50, 60. We're on the downslope of this curve, and we spend the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years of our lives being spectators because we can't do what we want to do. And some of that might even be in a nursing home. But in the blue zones, people live long and well into their 90s, and when they die rather quickly rather than a prolonged period of disability. So, for example, here's a Blue Zone member from Loma Linda, California. He's a cardiovascular surgeon that practiced into his mid-90s. He's over 100 now and can still water ski. Here's a guy from Okinawa who can stand on his head in his 90s. And maybe you don't want to do something that exotic. Maybe you just want to be able to garden well into your 90s or even hundreds and see your grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Well, when we look at the blue zones, the common factors are quite telling. They all eat a plant-based diet. They eat a high carbohydrate diet. Most are grain-based. One is yam or sweet potato-based. So the predominance of their calories are coming from carbohydrates. They all eat legumes on a daily basis. They have, on average, a small portion of meat maybe once a week. and that's mixed in with rice or something like that as a condiment. It's not a big steak on a plate. None of them use cow's dairy. Some use goat's cheese, which is kind of like a condiment sprinkled over some pasta or something like that. They all move naturally, so they don't have to program exercise into their lives. A lot of them are farmers, and they have a purpose in living. They know what they're supposed to do in life. They have meaning, and they have a community that supports them. So they're not the oddball if they live this way. You're odd if you don't, so you have that peer pressure to do it. The one blue zone in the United States is in Loma Linda, California, which has been the center of many studies and over 50 published papers. And we want to look at just a little of the evidence from the Adventist Health Studies. They've got their own website. You can look at the papers in detail, and it's rather fascinating. This is the study that really got me hooked into going this direction myself. So over 150,000 Adventists were followed for 25 years. They started out well, and the Adventists encourage a plant-based diet, the Garden of Eden diet, because they believe as a religious group that we'll all be eating vegetables in the eternal state. So they encourage that. They also avoid pork, don't smoke, don't drink. About 8% of the people in this study ate a completely plant-based diet. And again, vegan here, but not French fries and Oreo cookies, more what we're calling these plant-based whole foods. About 28% had dairy and eggs. About 10% added some fish. About 5 to 6 had kind of like a Mediterranean diet here. And another half had more of a standard diet, but with a heavy plant slant, being encouraged by the group to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes like the Garden of Eden. When they saw what happened after the 25 years, they found over here on the left, those eating the plant-based diet were the only ones, both men and women, the only ones as a group that were normal weight. As you added the animal products, the weight went up. They looked at the development of diabetes. Those eating the plant-based whole food diet, less than 2% developed diabetes. But look at the stair-stepping. As you add the animal products in, the risk of diabetes went up. So here's that Mediterranean diet that I was trying. There's better yet. There's a plant-based diet. As you strip out those animal products, you can lower that risk of developing diabetes. Well, look here, we're talking about their omnivorous group, about 7% diabetes. We know that across the country, that SAD diet, standard American diet, we're looking at 14 or 15%, which keeps going up year by year. And sadly, here in Southeast Ohio, study done through Ohio University by some of my colleagues found that about 30% of our adults have full-blown diabetes, not to mention the large number that have pre-diabetes as well. So why is this? What is the driver of diabetes? Well, if you look at these cross-sectional studies and look for associations, this isn't proven causation, but these are associations, that processed meats are associated with an increased risk of diabetes, about 50%. Eating meat once a week is associated with an increased risk of about 30%, and regular meat consumption with a doubling of the risk. As little as 5% of the calories consumed daily coming from animal protein is associated with an increased risk of diabetes by 30%. That's less than a skinless chicken breast a day. Eggs, 1 egg per week is associated with an increased risk. 2 to 3 eggs double, 5 eggs triple, and if you have diabetes, even 1 egg a week is associated with doubling the risk of heart disease. We see the same thing with blood pressure. Those who ate the plant-based diet, less than 10% developed hypertension. This may be the true essential genetic hypertension that's there, but look what happens as you add those animal products. the risk goes up. So rather than treating all of these people with medication, maybe we should just treat them with diet. Cholesterol, the same thing. Look here again, that Mediterranean diet, not much better because it's so high in dairy and poultry that we really don't get an advantage of cholesterol. But here, less than 4% had elevated cholesterol eating a completely plant-based diet. There's studies that have said that really only about 4% of patients that get statins benefit. Maybe this is that same 4%. This is that genetic predisposition. These are the people who may need the statins. The rest of us just need a healthier diet. We don't need to eat any cholesterol. We make all the cholesterol we need internally in our liver, so there's no reason that we need to have this. Actually, eating this cholesterol is associated with many of our common cancers. Well, then, where do we get our protein? We're told we have to get our protein. Well, actually, we don't need near as much protein as we've been told. Some of the longevity studies show that the people who live the longest and the healthiest really only have about 5, at the most 7 or 8% of their calories coming from protein at all. And when you look at these animal products, they're more fat than protein. So really, we shouldn't think of steak as protein. It's 60% fat or higher, depending on the cut. Cheese, very high. But look at this. Beans, broccoli, 25, 26% protein. Well, that's where cows and horses and elephants and all these big animals get their protein, from plants. And we can too. We only need about 5 to 10% of our calories coming from protein, and we can get those right there from beans and greens without even needing to think about it or calculate it. It just happens. Even bodybuilders and extreme athletes, just eat the right food. It'll all come together in the right proportions. You won't even have to take those protein supplements. What about calcium? Don't we have to have our milk for our calcium? Well, actually not. Studies have shown that among women who eat more calcium from dairy products actually have more hip fractures. And men who consume more dairy actually have more prostate cancer. So we can get all our calcium from beans and greens and don't need to worry about it as well from our diet if we're eating a well-balanced plant-based diet. So the underlying concept is this inflammation. Many experts out there in the field of inflammation believe this is the underlying cause of diabetes and cardiovascular disease and autoimmune disease and many of our cancers and all of these chronic diseases. Inflammation, as you're aware, is a normal response to invasion or injury. You cut yourself, it gets red, it gets swollen, develops some pus, and then it heals. Well, there's a low-grade inflammation that goes on in our bodies all the time, stimulated by things like animal products and processed foods like concentrated sugars, the white sugars, the white flours. There's some environmental things like glyphosate, and for some people that have a genetic predisposition, things like yeast and gluten. Within 20 minutes of consuming any animal product, I can measure in your blood an increase in inflammation. Your white blood count goes up, your sedimentation goes up, C-reactive protein and other changes occur as well. All these inflammatory markers, and it lasts for about 6 hours. The problem is we have bacon and eggs for breakfast. It boosts our inflammation. Then we have our chicken salad at lunch before the inflammation even subsides, and we boost it again. And then we have our pork chop and au gratin potatoes for dinner, and it boosts the inflammation again before it's settled down. And then ice cream before bedtime. And we go to bed in this chronic state of inflammation, and it's not till 2 or 3 in the morning that it actually begins to subside, and there's not enough time for our bodies to heal. This is the sleep researchers are telling us that much is going on in sleep that we've been unaware of. A lot of the repair of our DNA and the cleaning up of our damage throughout the day occurs while we're sleeping. But if we're stealing that time away from healthy sleep by going to bed with this inflammation, we're robbing ourselves of health and years of life. So we need to do something different. Actually, all these animal products that we're promoting are anti-inflammatory. So here's what I tell my patients. I want them to move away from the stuff on the left, the animal products and processed foods. This is what's causing our problem. We eat it too often and too much. So we need to move down the line and eat more of these plant-based products. This should be our everyday, 3 times a day food. We should save the stuff over here for special occasions. Now, I'm not an expert in all the biochemistry and the physiology and all that stuff's going on, but there's lots of mechanisms that are playing a part in this, such as things like TMAO, which accelerates atherosclerosis, which any animal product that we consume is converted by the gut bacteria into TMAO and leads to all kinds of problems. There's some other things going on as well, that whole idea of the leaky gut with the autoimmune diseases, and on and on. There's multiple mechanisms that are being identified. One of the big underlying problems, however, is our culture. Our culture promotes food and unhealthy food around all of our most sacred events, our family gatherings, our celebrations, our first dates. Our memories are tied in to these foods that are unhealthy. They're okay now and then for those special occasions, for celebrations, Christmas, Easter, maybe even once a week at family dinner, but not every day, 3 times a day. That's what's killing us. You know, our food industry hasn't really been too concerned about our health. They just want to create products that are high in fat, salt, and sugar so that we want to buy them and consume them. And they've been treated by the health industry after we get sick, which really hasn't paid attention to food until now. We're connecting the dots. The most important determinant of our health is that fork, unless you're a smoker, and then obviously you need to quit smoking. That's even a higher risk than eating a poor diet. So we need to think as food as medicine, use it to our advantage for our patients, and good tasting food, not that untasty medicine that we need to take with a spoonful of sugar to get it down. I want to point out just a couple more studies that help us understand what we should be recommending to our patients, because this whole concept of vegan or even plant-based can be misunderstood. So there were a bunch of researchers from Harvard that looked back at several of these longitudinal studies with over 100,000 people who started out healthy and then developed chronic disease over time. They had good dietary data as well as other things, and they looked at diet and its relationship to developing coronary artery disease. And they broke the diet, and it wasn't just diet, it was portions of specific foods. So we're not talking like the Adventist study, people who were only eating plants. These are average people who are eating some plants and some animal products, and they reported how much they were eating. So they broke them into 2 groups. There were any of the animal-based products, and then they broke them into plant-based products. And they broke that down into 2 groups, which they called the unhealthy and the healthy plant-based products. So generally, these healthy plant-based products are the things that I'm encouraging people to eat. I probably wouldn't have put the oils here. They would be over here, because to me that's processed, but that's just one small part of this. And I normally would put potatoes over here in the healthy group, but when you look at what those potatoes were, they're French fries and potato chips, so they do go in that unhealthy group. And here's what they found, which was very surprising to me. Not so much this slide, but the next slide. So here's the average risk of heart disease. And up here is the unhealthy plant-based diet. So the more portions of that, so this would be the Oreo cookies and French fries, and the donuts and the white bread, the more you ate of that portion by portion, the higher your risk of heart disease. But this dotted line is a plant-based diet overall, and this red line is the healthy plant-based diet. So the more portions of healthy plant-based foods that you consume, the lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. So vegans that are eating foods that are high in salt, sugar, and fat aren't eating a healthy diet. They're fooling themselves if they think they're decreasing their risk of heart disease. That's why there's many obese vegans out there who can't seem to understand why they're sick. This is the slide that really surprised me though. So here you've got the animal products in red. So the more animal products you eat, the higher the risk of heart disease. But the unhealthy plant-based diet was even worse. So the sweets and white bread and donuts were worse than the chicken and eggs for promoting heart disease, serving by serving. They did the same study then with diabetes, and they found out same kind of thing. The unhealthy plant-based diet, those concentrated sugars and bleached flours and that kind of stuff, increased the risk of diabetes, but the healthiest diet were those plant-based foods that portion by portion, they lowered the risk of diabetes. So we want to encourage our patients as well as make choices ourselves from over here. Our everyday 3 times a day food should be from these plant-based whole foods, and the foods over here, the processed foods, the animal products, should be saved for those special occasions. So some of you might be thinking, well, you know, this Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, they've been promoted out there. Well, interestingly, yeah, the DASH diet works and the Mediterranean diet works better than the standard American diet, but it's a compromise. Even the people from the DASH diet did some studies on vegetarian diets, and they said that is the best diet. But the DASH diet, admittedly, in their article, is a compromise to make it more palatable to non-vegetarians. So that's fine. If that's the furthest we can get our patients to go, that's okay. But I think we have an obligation to tell them there's a better choice yet in that plant-based whole food diet. So some of you are out there thinking moderation, everything in moderation, right? Well, okay, how about moderate death? Here's what I prescribe to my patients. I try to get them up to 40 grams of fiber a day, filling at least 75% of this plate with foods that are rich in fiber and water, a cup of legumes, which are beans, peas, and lentils daily. Minimize those animal products and processed foods. Eat them all together on a celebration day, no more than 1 to 2 times a week. So move down this direction toward the healthier diet. You can see what I do with my patients on our website. Look up lifestylemedicine.mhsystem.org. The first session with my patients, either individually or with groups, is this fill up with fiber. I tell them what to add to their diet. Then the second session, we talk about the blue zones and what they should minimize in their diet. Well, the good news is this path that used to be lonely is getting busier and busier. It's not quite there yet. Well, I hope at some point we'll get to this, where lifestyle medicine is the norm, and that everybody will be on the path. It'll be the unusual patient who is not following the pathway of health. If you have any questions, please email me. I wasn't able to get into lots of details, the specifics. I give lots of examples to my patients about how to actually make these foods and to make them tasty and inexpensively. I can share answers to all of that, or you can look at the videos online, which are the PowerPoints that I actually share with the patients. Thank you for your attention.